Hi, everybody. Welcome to our third Mountain Midwest Hub webinar. We're really excited to have y'all on this call. As you are joining, please feel free to put yourself on mute, but if you'd like to jump into the chat at any point during our webinar, feel free and I will try to help elevate that to our speakers. This webinar is basically an effort to kind of get some topics out to our region and movement that we are kind of hearing as desired topics. So we're really excited. I'm going to turn it over as quickly as I can to Chris and Shay, who are our presenters today, talking about becoming a culture of choice in the post-pandemic, or as we were saying, continuing pandemic world. Chris Martinez is the Senior Vice President for People, Culture, and Equity at the Conservation Law Foundation currently, but has a very deep history with the Y and continues to serve in our movement as a volunteer, but has been with the Y movement since 1997. And then our second speaker, Shay Bemba, is the Vice President of Membership and Programs at the YMCA of Greater Omaha, and has been with our movement since 2001. So we're really excited to welcome you both and hear from your expertise. I'm going to turn it right on over to Shay, who will get us started.
Right. Hello, everyone. Great to share space with you all today. Thanks so much for carving out time in the midst of, I'm sure, very busy schedules. It is my pleasure to get to co-lead and present on this topic. As Ellie mentioned, been with the YMCA for 21 plus years and in a variety of different positions, but I did want to put a disclaimer out there at the beginning of this and saying, I'm not coming into this presentation as an expert in this by any means, nor am I coming here to claim that the YMCA that I'm currently at here in Omaha has figured all of this out, because that is definitely not the case. I'm here to really co-facilitate a conversation and to share some trends, lift up some examples of what some local YMCAs are doing as well, and be able to share some tips and tricks, as you can see on the agenda. So that's our goal, all in 30 whole minutes of time with you all today. So I will turn it over to my dear friend, Chris, who I've had the pleasure and opportunity of reconnecting with through this webinar, to further introduce himself as well and take it from here.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. It is so exciting to be back at the Y, even if it's virtually. I've missed all of you. I don't know everyone, but the Y is a family. And so I'm feeling the good vibes from all over the region. So thank you so much for inviting me back, even if it's just for 30 minutes. I'll take it. I'll take those 30 minutes. First, I wanted to talk a little bit about the trends that we're seeing. And I don't think this is going to shock many of you. Many of you have probably been watching the news as diligently as I have, especially as we're struggling to retain our staff and we're hoping to recruit quality staff amidst the great resignation, as some have referred to it. But right now, there are nearly 4.3 million people quitting their jobs. That was in January, according to the U.S. Department of Labor's JOLTS report issued Wednesday. And this was an article from back in March, so it's a little dated, but it's still fairly recent information. That level is near a record set in November. There were 11.3 million job openings, just shy of December's record, and we're losing folks from the Y to those job openings. Many of the job openings are ours. We're hoping to recruit people to our organization. Data indicates the US labor market remains strong in early 2022. There's still high demand for workers, and employers have raised pay. Many of your Ys have probably decided to raise pay or are hoping to raise pay, contributing to the great resignation trend. Here is a really interesting chart I would like to draw your attention to. This is from the Pew Research Center, and I'm going to give you just a couple of seconds to look over this chart. We're not going to cover everything. We don't have time, again, 30 minutes, but we're going to focus on the top 3 categories. According to the Pew Research Center, majorities of workers who quit a job in 2021 say low pay, 63%, no opportunities for advancement, 63%, and feeling disrespected at work, 57%, were the reasons why they quit, according to the February 7th through 13th survey. At least a third say each of these were major reasons why they left. And again, just giving you a couple of seconds to look over that chart there on the right. You can see those top categories that we're going to discuss, but there were also several other categories that led to folks choosing to move on from their position. And I'm going to turn it over to Shay so we can have a little bit of discussion. We want this to be as interactive as possible.
Yeah, so we'd really love to hear from you all in the chat box. If you had to narrow it down to a primary trend that you're seeing at your YMCA out of these three, and maybe it's all of them, but if you had to narrow it down, go ahead and put in the chat box either a 1, a 2, or a 3 to help give us a pulse on what you're all experiencing across the movement, and also may help us to be able to further tailor our future presentation points. Seeing lots of ones.
And Ellie, yeah, Ellie's keeping an eye on the chat. She can give us a summary. I know everybody's going to want a 4, all of the above, but that is not an option. 1, 2, or 3.
Yep, I'm seeing ones, and a sprinkling of 2 and 3s, but mostly ones coming through.
Sure. 1 with combination of being understaffed / overworked.
Yep.
Familiar to anybody?
And we're going to talk again about all 3 of these, but it helps us to understand what the primary driver is, what you're seeing at your Y in terms of these departures. First, we're going to talk a little bit about culture. And that really gets after that question that you saw about feeling disrespected at work. If you've ever felt disrespected at work, and that is something that permeates or is pervasive throughout your Y, you know that that's a culture problem. Nobody should come to work and feel disrespected while they are at work. So we really need to have some really hard conversations around culture when that kind of behavior is tolerated in the workplace and at the Y. So the way that Shay and I have structured this is that we really want to look at different levels of engagement around these topics. We realize that Ys that are on this call represent very small Ys, very large associations, everything in between, maybe Ys that do have some financial resources, others that struggle, maybe they're really having to make some difficult choices after COVID and during COVID. Not everybody got that Mackenzie Scott money that we've all heard about. So, how are we planning around that? And so level 1 is really baseline, hopefully things that are affordable, things that are not too expensive to implement, and things that you can really do at a grassroots level. You don't have to involve a lot of folks, and maybe you don't necessarily even have to make it a large initiative. It can be something that you can do independently. So level 1, these are some supervision best practices. This is HR driven typically, but it can be boots on the ground, recognition and appreciation. So we talk about that a lot, but you would be surprised, or maybe not, how often this doesn't happen. I mean, think back to the last time that your supervisor said thank you. Something very simple as thank you for a job well done, pat on the back, high five, a little handwritten note. I have seen, time and time again, folks who don't realize the value or the importance of recognition and appreciation. So I'm going to ask Ellie to put in the chat. There is a link actually to a creator on Etsy who made one of the best recognition appreciation sheets that I have seen. And you can pay this creator, this artist, for her work, or you can make your own version. There's many versions of this particular template available online, but it allows you to connect with each of your staff members around how they best feel recognized or appreciated. Of course, with my DEI hat on, or my DIG hat on, I like this sheet because it takes into account a couple of really important factors. First, not everyone appreciates being appreciated in the same way. Some people like one-on-one high fives, and some people like to be called out in front of everyone at a big staff meeting. So we need to be mindful of how people want to be recognized, as well as any allergies they have. Sometimes we'll do treats for our staff, but we don't stop to think, well, maybe somebody has an allergy. So I really like this way of recognizing and appreciating our staff. This is a very easy thing that you can have new staff fill out when they start. You keep it on file. When they have a great day, or you just want to offer some encouragement, you can do that. Training, of course, is baseline. If you don't have a method already in place for upward feedback, again, this doesn't have to be expensive. It can be driven by HR with something like a 360 review tool, but it can be something as simple as during the performance appraisal process, having an opportunity to ask your employee, what can I do better? The question I like to ask is, what can I stop doing? What can I start doing? And what can I continue doing to best support you in your role? Start, stop, continue. Very simple. Level 2 This is where, again, if you've done everything in level 1, you're like, our why is rocking and rolling. We have training down pat. Our staff feel recognized and appreciated. There's good upward feedback in place. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DIG. Those are all being taken into account with our various departments and our programs. Then maybe it's time to move to level 2, which is a climate survey. Again, this can be expensive. Many of us use the company SEER, other companies to do a formal staff survey that's very scientifically, methodology, checked, everything is appropriate. It doesn't have to be that fancy. I have worked for Wise where we've used SEER survey and we paid tens of thousands of dollars. And I've worked for Wise where we have had a very lean budget and we've made something in a SurveyMonkey or a Google Doc. The most important thing though is that you're actually doing it. You need to engage folks with the survey. So if you need to offer some kind of fun incentive or raffle to get people to participate, do it. Once you have the results, communicate the results, because how many times have we taken a survey and we're really excited to share our thoughts and our ideas and we never hear anything back from our association or from our leaders. And so if we're investing our time to answer a survey, we expect to hear back what those survey findings were, and then involve staff with the follow through. So as you have really actionable results from that survey, involve your staff in the process to move the needle in those categories, especially that relate to culture. And last but not least is level 3. When you think about having something be staff driven, maybe you can put together a culture core of staff that are excited about culture, are excited about the mission, want to engage the rest of the organization, start affinity groups, and bring fun and excitement to the work. So there are ways that HR can drive this. There are ways that you as a manager or as an individual contributor can add to this conversation. And you can also make it a team effort with a culture core, which is something I've seen some Wise do. A lot of fun. And then I'm going to turn it over to Shay, and she's going to be able to offer us what this looks like at the Y. The examples I gave were very broad. Shay is going to help narrow in the focus for us.
Yeah, so just to lift up an example from the Buckeye Family YMCA, I had an opportunity to connect with a friend and colleague, Adam Schilling, who's the current CEO there. I'm sure many of you on this call have heard culture is created by what we celebrate, like straight out of Living Our Cause training, right? I'm seeing some heads nod. Yes. So, Adam really talked about organizationally for them leaning into the work-life balance, especially since pandemic began. And what does that look like? And of course, he's able to really influence change in this particular area. I think, all of us are in some way, hopefully. But what he talked about for them is really leaning into the balance, taking it deeper as opposed to, hey, you should really take some time off, and I support it and I either do it too and respect that or I don't. But he really talked about, let's talk about in our meetings, how can we turn off? It's very hard in the why. So what does that look like? What are the things that are stopping us from being able to turn off? And how can we support each other in allowing that? He did talk about how they've provided the option for staff to work 4 days, 10-hour shifts. Some have opted out of that, it didn't work for them or they weren't interested, but the feedback has been, it's nice to know that it could be an option for those like full-time staff. It's good to have it, whether I take advantage of it or not, it's nice that it's there. He also shared that the exempt staff weren't interested in a policy that felt too strict, but that the exempt staff really was like, it's a culture, we're talking about it. So I definitely wanted to lift that up of, maybe isn't rocket science, but the taking it to a deeper level of really digging into what does it look like to turn off? How can we support that as an organization? He also really mentioned, of course, the importance of recognition, but also let's not forget about the part-time staff. Do the part-time staff feel like they belong? Do they feel like they're valued? And do they have a pathway, which we'll touch on here in a little bit, just pathway in general, but do they have a pathway for progression or engagement in the organization as well? So trying to see, they've been talking about mental health, just calling it out, having more conversations around mental health and the importance of that. I see Ellie's background seems very appropriate, but yeah, just digging in a little bit deeper and shifting the culture as opposed to here's the policy. Anything to add, Chris?
Yeah, I do. You mentioned that it's not rocket science. It's really not. But the fact is, a lot of times when we're burning out, we'll get a slap on the wrist saying, "We'll take your vacation time." We have vacation time for a reason. Take your vacation time. Take your PTO. And we're not actually stopping and having that conversation before we approach burnout. So it actually is pretty novel that they're spending time in a meeting talking about this. Because think about the last time, when was the last time you made the topic of your meeting? We're all so busy, our agendas are so full. Let's stop and let's talk about in our meeting how to actually do this and not wait until we're burning out. I think that's key. So next we're going to move on to career advancement. Again, one of those top 3 categories that are unfortunately, causing folks to leave the Y. Career advancement is important. Level 1, again, very basic stuff at level 1, but stuff that's not particularly expensive. So first, make sure that anytime you have a one-on-one, you're having a formalized conversation with your employee. Talk to them about where they want to go. Talk to them about what they want to do. What challenges are they facing? What skills are they lacking? What excites them? What projects are they working on that really fill their cup? That's so important, and we forget about that. Our meetings become a list of to-dos. They become a list of the most pressing items, those items that are on fire, and we need to pause and we need to say, you are doing an excellent job here. I want to be thinking about your growth and development. It's absolutely true that you are responsible for your own growth and development. I hear that all the time, but a really good supervisor makes the growth and development of their employees a high level priority. So have that formalized conversation. Use a template if you need it. I'm going to ask Ellie to put another template that I found online, a free template that you can use or adapt. Please don't think this template is the end all be all. You can Google it and find 40 other versions. Find one that you like and have a template that you use. It could be at the time of performance appraisal, or it could be another time of year that you want that's separate and distinct from performance appraisal season, and have that conversation with someone. Have that conversation. For some of us, that comes very intuitively. We love leadership development. We love growing our people. That's not everybody's skill set. If that's not your skill set, just like, recognizing folks is sometimes not a skill set, you build that skill set as a supervisor. Recognize your staff, but also have conversations about their growth and development and build it into the structure of your relationship with that employee. Also, the accountability is important. I'm not going to spend a lot of time there. That's pretty self-explanatory. But again, feeling disrespected at work, that's something that has an accountability piece with it from leadership, but so does career advancement. There needs to be accountability for making sure that these kind of formalized conversations are actually happening. So maybe those templates all get turned into HR. I know that sounds very heavy-handed, but maybe those templates all go to one source to make sure that it's actually happening, and we don't just assume that it's happening. Level 2, let's say you're doing everything at level 1. Level 2, let's go to organizational career pathways. I think, we assume, we have this, oftentimes a young person comes to the Y not knowing that the Y can be a career. If I asked everyone on the call to raise their hand, if they thought the Y was going to be their career, many of us wouldn't have. I would not have thought the Y was going to be a career. I wanted to be a journalist. And then I started working part-time at the Y, fell in love with the Y, and made it a career. But what we can do better as an organization is we can paint the picture. We can paint the picture for our staff, not just our young staff, not just our new staff, but for all of our staff. And let's give them a very clear picture of what their career at the Y can look like. And there are a lot of tools that we can do this with. It's very unique to your Y. Your titles vary from Y to Y. Career trajectories can vary from Y to Y, but putting together something, and I'll ask Ellie to put one that I found online for a digital career. So if you were in the IT or digital space and you wanted to build a career at the Y, maybe you could create something that looks like the document that Ellie is going to put into the chat. But you can do that for any department. You can have a career ladder or a career pathways for aquatics. You can have a career ladder or a career pathways for wellness or membership or youth development. Or you can have a career lattice that shows that, you don't have to stay in membership. If you want to make the jump from membership into youth development, for youth development into aquatics, it can be done. Somebody has to do that work. It is work. A lot of this stuff is work, but it's worth it when you're not losing staff left and right because they feel like there is a goal for them to aspire to. And level 3, training and experience programs. I'm not going to go too deep into this because I know that Shay's example is really going to speak to building experiences into staff's time at the Y. It's mentorships, it's coaching, it's having a peer coach when you start in your role. And I have internships there with a capital I and a capital N. That is not a typo. Sometimes Ys can create internships for existing employees that want to explore other areas in their Y. So It is an investment of time and money, but I'm going to say to my employee, hey, Joaquin, I know you're really passionate about wellness, but right now you're working in membership, but I'm going to let you shadow wellness for a week. And I'm going to have you spend time with wellness. And maybe this is going to be a good fit for you and a good fit for our Y. So formalizing some of those internship experiences beyond just our college students, looking at our current employee base and giving them those opportunities. Sometimes we forget about them. And I'm going to turn it over to Shay to talk again about what career advancement looks like at one of our Ys.
Yeah, so full transparency, when I reached out to a handful of colleagues to touch base on this particular topic, the first few responses that I got were, career advancement, we're not really being intentional right now. We're just constantly spinning our wheels trying to hire and recruit. And that's been a huge focus. And I'm guessing that many of you can relate to that. Not that something wasn't happening in this area, but it certainly wasn't a primary focus. I am going to lift up in the spirit of sharing about a Y, the YMCA of Greater Richmond here. I had a chance to connect with Liz Hansberry, and she's also connected to the hub as the lead there too. Ellie's shaking her head, probably has contact with her, but this Y in particular, certainly has shifted gears, as probably many of ours have, to more of a hybrid model. Went a long time without doing formal training in person and really came to find the value of access through virtual opportunities and not having people have to drive and mileage and time and things like that. So, really working towards much more of a hybrid model. She did talk about how they did need to cut training dollars. That definitely went during some tough times. But what they didn't do is stop providing access to trainings. They partnered with people in their community to be able to offer virtual opportunities for learning. So they didn't necessarily have the capacity to do it all themselves, but partnered and talked about not just handing a sheet of paper to staff, here's your next training, and I will share a sheet of paper with you next, but not just handing a sheet of paper to staff, but really making it all about the overall experience and bringing together conversations and dialogue to enrich their employee experience and being able to help facilitate that in the midst of not having as many resources. I am going.
Shay, you just went on mute, so I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide.
There we go. I'm going to share this document with you. Thank you. They do have an internal resource that they have mapped out the next certifications in the YUSA certification system for people to take and have linked in LCDC the actual registration. So they're having more intentional conversations around here are the next things, and having, Chris referenced a roadmap as it relates to a training trajectory in a sense. She also talked about, though, the importance of networking and making those contacts. And I know it can be harder with maybe less in-person time, but is it virtual, and what can that look like? And the importance of being able to know people, and that opening up doors for not even necessarily the next job, but looking at career advancement around in existing roles, being able to expand and build skills in areas through stretch assignments or leading a task force or joining a cohort or a pilot project or a national opportunity. And those opportunities that can really lead to, when that next may come available, that staff feel more equipped and ready and have a much stronger resume to position themselves for the next opportunity. Chris and I had a chance to do some reflecting around, what season of life are you in? You or your team. Like, there was a season of life where I could say yes to everything. And, that did, in my experience, lead to the next, not always on my timeline, but, eventually it could happen. But then there are other stages of life. And what does that balance look like for you or for your staff to be able to continue to stretch and develop, but also to not, feed into the burnout or, overdoing it as well. I also just wanted to quickly mention the 70-20-10 learning model, where they really talk about, we could send the follow-up some additional information if you're not familiar with it. in the notes when we do a recap, but 70% of the learning happening on the job, 20% being coaching, and 10% being formal training. So thinking about what can that look like for you and your staff teams, that's not just necessarily registering and attending a training. And in the training realm, how much learning can happen from if you're training, if you're attending, or even learning from other participants that are in the class as well. So anything to add, Chris?
No, we have a couple minutes left, so I want to make sure we get through compensation. This is important. I know we only have 30 minutes, so Shay and I will stay on a few minutes after in case there are questions. But let's get through this compensation piece. This is really important. So first of all, from a compensation standpoint, very reactive would be to do an internal compensation review. This is something you can do on your own. Brief example, just sitting down and looking at the sports directors that were in one of my YMCA associations, we noticed that a brand new sports director, male, with a journalism background, came in with a salary that was at least $10,000 more than a female colleague who had been a sports director for many, many years in our association. So just being able to look at salaries across, one Y, across one branch, across one department. If you supervise the child care department and you just want to take a quick look at what everyone's making to make sure there's no errors, that someone didn't miss a performance review or a merit increase, do that on your own. Again, it's reactive, but you might be able to make a difference for 1 or 2 employees. And for those 1 or 2 employees, that might allow them to stick around. So level 1, again, that's a very basic compensation review that you can do on your own without necessarily engaging HR if it's within your purview. Always check with HR if you're unsure. Level 2, a compensation analysis. This can be reactive. It can also be proactive. A full compensation analysis, again, usually led by HR, but not necessarily, can be done with your own staff, or it can be with an external consultant if you do have the financial backing to do that. I actually used the hub model that existed before we called it the hub. And there was actually an expert in the Y movement named Carol Clark from one of the Ys in Florida who did this for me for free as a result of my relationship with YUSA and the predecessor to the hub. So I was able to do a full compensation analysis with Carol for the YMCA Greater Grand Rapids, 1,600 employees. And we were able to look at the competition in our market. We were able to make sure that our plan was market-based so that we were paying appropriately and that we were not always behind the 8 ball. Again, you can be reactive or proactive. Many of us right now are going to have to be reactive when we do a compensation analysis. And lastly, most big picture and broadest strokes of all is a compensation plan or a compensation philosophy. This is very proactive. You're looking at those equity considerations like the gender pay gap. You're looking at race. You're looking at other factors that might unintentionally or unconsciously play into some of the pay inequities that we're seeing. You can look at cost of living adjustments. You can have that already built in. We already build in merit increases and then we cancel them when it comes time to do the budget. But we do need to look at cost of living. We do need to look at inflation, especially now. And we need to look at benchmarks. At the YMCA of the Triangle, when I worked there, we were determined that any youth director that started never made less than a starting teacher salary. Now, that's not saying a lot, but it gave us a guideline that we were able to at least compete with entry-level teachers when it came to our youth development directors who were responsible for having a comparable degree. And I'm going to turn it over to Shay real quick to talk about compensation at the Y.
Yeah, so I'm going to ask Ellie to drop in the chat box. There is another document that YUSA has created. Essentially, it's 2022 Salary Administration Guideline Recommendations, and this can be found on link. So this screenshot was actually taken from that document, but essentially in summary, and I know we're running short on time, looking at it as a big picture. So what's the total rewards, all-encompassing strategy, and it's not just about pay. You can see pay is certainly a component, but it's benefits. Is it flexibility? Is it, dress code, staff appreciation, culture, much of what we've talked about. And I know compensation came through a lot of ones at the very initial pulse. So this is important. So just keeping the perspective that there are several components in the total reward strategy that go into that. And, certainly the document goes into many, many pages of details around having equitable practices and board approval and much more extensive resource if you'd like to dig into that.
Yeah, and I will say to just, start closing us out, Shay, if you don't mind, it's a yes and. we can't let our foot off the gas when it comes to looking at our compensation best practices. We need to be equitable, but we also need to be comparable to what's in the marketplace. We're not going to be able to pay the bills with a t-shirt, at the end of the day, when someone gives us a t-shirt as a thank you. So we need to be looking at everything that Shay just shared with you. I would look at that. I did have a chance to look at that plan that Shay sent me. It is thorough. So it is a very helpful document if your Y doesn't already have a compensation plan as a starting point. I will stay on the call. Shay will stay on the call. We want to make sure that if you have any questions, we won't be able to stay on long, but we want to make sure that there is some time for Q&A. So Ellie, if you want to stop the recording, you're welcome to, and I will stop sharing my screen.
Awesome. Thank you both, Chris and Shay, for sharing. I'm going to drop a long message in the chat for everybody so that you have access to our YouTube channel where this will get posted. But also I'll share my email in case anybody has questions. I'm going to stop the recording and let us ask and answer some questions. So thank you.